We're looking at a log here from mxracer33x who asks for a comment on what's happening at the end of rolls. So let's take a look at a roll, and here's one now. And it does look like there's some bounce back. It's like pretty strong and so fast it's almost, if I wasn't looking for it, I might even miss it. Let's watch it again, this time at half speed. It's really small. I mean, we can see it in the gyro trace here, and see that there's actually several oscillations, not just one bounce back, but several oscillations. But man, you can really hardly see it. And you could see the little micro oscillations there at 25% speed. So what's happening there? Well, there is one thing I want to point out. It's not actually related to your question directly, but I think it's pretty neat, and I want to show it to people who are watching. Do you see how I've pointed out in the past that one of the things to look at is how the gyro trace returns to the axis relative to where RC command returns to the axis. And the ideal thing that you're looking for is that at the moment that your stick is centered, you are at 0 angular rate, at least if you're flying in acro mode or rate mode versus an auto level mode, which was set auto level aside. And we've seen in the past that when the gyro hits the axis at the exact same time as RC command, there's always some overshoot. So what we would like to see ideally is some kind of a smooth exponential curve, but what we actually see is that it dives in, boom, overshoots, and comes back. If we look here, we can see that the gyro hits the axis a little bit in advance of the RC command. How did that happen? And the answer is that the D term did it. The D term always leads the P term a little bit. So we can see that as the P term is rising, but it's starting to fall, the D term is already going down. And as the P term is falling, now it's starting to rise, the D term is turning around. So the D term is always a little bit ahead of the P term, right? You can just sort of see that visually. And so in this case, as the P term begins to slow down, as your stick is beginning to return to center here, the D term is already changing directions and starting to go the other way. And that causes the gyro to almost lead the stick a little bit, which in fact is what you want, because as we've seen, if you hit the mark at the exact same time that the stick is centered, you'll overshoot. But if you get there early, well, it turns out in this case we still have a little bit of overshoot, but we're closer to stopping dead on, as opposed to having that overshoot actually leads the stick a little bit. We have a little bit of overshoot and bounce back, and then back the other way, even before the stick is centered. So it's almost like the PID algorithm can sort of see the future. Not really, but that's what that D term is going to do for you, and that's why the D term is so important to getting good tuning. What's happening in your loop or your roll? Well, so like you said in your post, we're really splitting hairs here. And when you get to this point in fine tuning, there's only so much you can do by looking at the logs. Really, it's a question of trial and error. You're going to bump P up by 0.1 or 0.2. You're going to bump it down by 0.1 or 0.2. You're going to add 5 to your D term, add another 5, take 5 away. You're really just feeling it out at this point and just deciding exactly where you want to split that hair, right? So I can tell you whatever I think based on looking at this log, but at the end of the day, only the pilot can decide at the point where you're fine-tuning it as much as you are. But what I see here in the log is, if the fact that I see these two oscillations here at the beginning of the P of the well, I can see a big D term oscillation, but the P term is not that bad. P term is jump, jump. So it's really P term is one push into the loop and one push out. and I've said this before, but I'll say it again in case somebody isn't following along. I say it's because the RC command and gyro go below the axis. Here's the 0 axis. They go below the axis. That's left roll. The P term goes below the axis, so it's pushing the same direction. Now it goes above the axis, so it's pushing the opposite direction, trying to slow the roll down. We really do see one push in, one push out, another push out. So your P term's a little bumpy here, and I know we've seen cases where there was a bumpy P term and the rolls looked awesome, and that's just that different copters fly differently. In this case, we do have this little bounce back, and we can also see that reflected in the P term here. The two approaches I might take are to either increase D or decrease P. There's only so much you can do with D to rein P in. If you have a little bit too much P and you add some D, it softens it out and life gets good. If you have just a hair more P than that, then adding a bunch of D isn't going to rein it in until you get to the point that the copter's not flying right. So the reason I hesitate to sort of make any recommendation is that everywhere else, your P term on roll looks really well behaved. We see some oscillation. There will always be oscillation in the P term. There will never not be oscillation in the P term. P term oscillates. That's what it does. That's why we have I and D. So your P term overall doesn't look really crazy. And here's another roll. And oh, look how consistent it is. It's so consistent. Isn't that nice? Or I don't know. That's something. It's so consistent in how it sort of leads and it wobbles there. And here your P term actually looks really sort of textbook good here. So anywhere I was going with excess P term, now I'm not so sure about. Because here we see a push in, a push out, a little bit of an extra wobble there, but mostly here in the middle, the P term is close to the axis. It's close to the 0 axis, means that you are pretty close to achieving the required angular rate. Now we got this weird little dip here in the D term, and that's because you moved the stick at a not quite perfectly smooth rate, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's what happened there. Or maybe there was some kind of a glitch in your RC command. I don't know. Don't know. Probably it's something you did with your fingers, but that's what this little dip here is for. You got another one in there? Let's find out if you got another one. Let's zoom out and see if you got another one. Here's another one. Let's see what this one looks like. So this one's a little more wobbly. Very similar. This one's actually looks like it's probably pretty good. A little bit of bounce back. No, actually not bounce back. Sorry. No bounce back at all. It stays below the line. So it actually stopped prematurely. And again, it looks like you're doing something with your stick here. So here you sort of held your stick in one position, and the roll stopped prematurely, and then had to continue. But that again is something you were doing with your stick, so we can't really draw too many conclusions there. Let's look at this one. See, that one looks just textbook perfect. So here's what I would tell you. I don't think you should change anything about your PID settings. I think you're really close to perfect. If you insist on trying something, try raising your D gain. And you may also have to reduce your D term cut hertz. In other words, lower the number for more filtering. So go from 11 to 10 to 9 maybe. Reason being that as you increase D, you're going to increase the noise, the amplification of noise. So if you bump your D up by 10, I'm just pulling these numbers out of thin air, but if you were to bump your D up by 10, maybe you'd have to decrease your D term cut hertz by 1 from 11 to 10 perhaps. The reason I say that is, I mean, there's not, your traces here are not super active, but in the times when it is active, there are some times when it looks like there's some noise sneaking in, just the tiniest bit. So perhaps if you were to increase D, that would get a little worse. I see some in your video, some things that look like it might be just the tiniest amount of noise. I could be wrong. So yeah, I think don't change a thing, but maybe consider playing with your throttle position during the rolls. So I found that throttle position, when I was trying to fix bounce back at the end of flips, I found that throttle position affected the ability of the copter to stop solidly at the end. I noticed that you hold your throttle position at about 1500 during these. This one, anyway. Let's look at a different one. We just watch me scroll. Here you're down closer to 1300. I don't know. Maybe experiment with maybe a lower throttle position to see if that's better. Or another thing I've tried is trying to, yeah, here you're closer to 1400. So maybe try getting that throttle down to 1100. Like really pull it down, not to the point where the motors stop. You should be set up so that you can keep your PID at min throttle and feature minus motor stop, so you can still fly even at idle throttle. But see if that makes a difference for you. That's what I got. Good luck. Happy flying. Bye bye.